And with that, I'd like to welcome everyone to what is technically our second eConference of 2024. It's been a while since we did the last one. So when we take an eConference out of storage, it's for a good reason. And today, it is a town hall all about climate and environmental issues under the dome. And so for the last couple of months, there is a sort of overarching project and a group of collaborators that have been coming together to better help planetariums and dome content creators and the like around the world better teach and educate and have access to the sort of content and data and subject matter expertise that allows us to better teach climate and environmental issues in our dome. And so that is right now a collaboration between the International Planetarium Society, the Astronomers for Planet Earth, the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, and the team over at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, California. And together, we have put together the series of town halls that we're working through today to have these dialogues and conversations. Additionally, we've also pulled a couple of special guests to hear at the beginning, sort of give a little bit of background about what they've done with climate and environmental science, their unique insights and perspectives, and then, of course, later on in the town hall, really open it up to a conversation to everyone else here. What have you dealt with? Where have the opportunities been in climate and environmental topics? What are the obstacles that you've dealt with? Where are your content limitations? Where has content been easier to come by? We want to have those conversations and start this and kind of kick this off for an ongoing series of conversations, not just here online today in February, but also as we move through the planetarium and other conferences throughout the year. Of course, IPS is the big one in July, and we love to keep this conversation going both in formal and in informal ways at IPS, but additionally at the state meetings and regional conferences and affiliate meetings that are going to happen outside of IPS throughout the year, and be able to bring in as many diverse voices and perspectives as possible. So for this session, our three special guests come to us primarily from west of the Mississippi River. This is, of course, why the later in the day presentation and town hall work for them. First, from the Flandrau Science Center and Planetarium in Arizona, we have Shiloe Fontes. Shiloe, say hi. Shiloe is also the co-chair of the Publications Committee and editor-in-chief of Planetarian for the International Planetarium Society. So I like Shiloh a lot. Second, from the University of Alaska and representing Astronomers for Planet Earth, we have Dr. Travis Rector. And from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Dr. Chun, there you are. And we're just going to have the three of you here at the beginning briefly introduce yourselves, where you're, what institutions you're working with, and why and what you've done with climate environmental topics throughout your career, and particularly the sort of most recent projects that you're working on. So Shiloh, I will turn it over to you, and then Travis and Chun.
Ooh, I get to be unmuted. Hello. As Mike said, I am Shiloe Fontes. I am the planetarium director here at Flandrau Science Center and Planetarium in Tucson, Arizona. If you haven't heard about our planetarium, we're part of the University of Arizona, which hopefully you are avoiding the news and our wonderful financial fiascos. Not my fault. Trying to throw that out there. I did not spend a lot of money on athletics. So we actually have always been interested in environmental science. A lot of our exhibits that are around our main dome area focus on different research that's being done here in Southern Arizona, as well as the university. We've done exhibits on climate change with monsoons and how those storms change, Sky Islands region and how water really affects how life can occur and exist here in Southern Arizona, and the way that all plays into part. We have an undersea exhibit talking about how the oceans affect us here, as well as how we affect the oceans and whatnot. And I thought it would be really interesting to try and bring this into the dome. So this was the first go we kind of had at connecting scientists with an audience on different topics. Of course, we did start with astronomy, planetarium astronomy. So we kicked it off on Astronomy Day. We actually did our first topic on black holes with Sam Gralla, who's a professor across the street. That went really well. The format worked. So it's like, okay, we can keep trying this. So we did the different topics, some astronomy, some environmental science. So we went from black holes to the mirrors that are built underneath our football stadium to dark energy, pairing all of these scientists with different full dome shows and then live components. So each evening ticket included a talk with a scientist, question and answers, a full dome film, a live star talk, demonstrations on the floor, and our open exhibits. And we really kind of delve into our first climate one with the mighty monsoon in last August, where we had a climatologist, Michael Crimmins, come and talk about how the monsoons have been evolving and how that has changed weather pattern, rainfall totals, not only through southern Arizona, but along this kind of western seaboard, and how we see that play through between snowpack, the water levels in our aquifers, how drainage and runoff affects all of that. And then we paired it with the Fisk film, Climate Change in Our Backyard. So thank you, Fisk. And then we made like recyclable bags. We had tables with different groups talking about ways to reduce our impact, like how we can more easily fit in changes into our visitors' lives that can really help with climate change. And then we did another space one with Cyrus Rex. And then October, we did Plastic Planet, which was really interesting. It was about PFAS, those forever plastics, which Davis Monthan Air Force Base is actually one of the first places where they really found this leaching and how to, we're working to figure out how do they kind of slow change and remove it from the soil because of how long it takes to break down in the grand scheme of things, especially once it gets into groundwater. That one was actually really well attended. We were a little unsure because forever plastics and PFAS is not quite common wordage, but especially as more and more people get talking about how we need to reduce plastics, how we need to remove them from our homes and everything like that, it actually ended up working really well. And that was a really key example of having a more complicated topic about climate change, a conversation about these things that we've been using now for decades and had, when they were first invented and discovered, having no idea how they were going to impact everything in the grand scheme of things. So a lot of really good conversation with that one, which was really great. So yeah, it's been kind of like an impetus. We're picking it back up here, coming up, just a few more astronomy ones before I get back into climate science. But it was a really neat way to engage a wide audience, not just adults, so adults and kids, and get them kind of having these conversations about climate change, especially in a desert where water is especially finite. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Shiloh. Travis, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for being here. So there's a couple of things I wanted to tell you about that we've been doing, and also just maybe leave with you 3 key points that I think might be helpful for everyone here. So as Michael mentioned, my name is Travis Rector, and I'm a professor at physics and astronomy at the University of Alaska Anchorage. And we too have a planetarium. And when we built our planetarium, it's a small planetarium, and we realized we couldn't compete with many of the individuals I see on the screen here today with creating content about astronomy. So what we decided is that we would focus on Alaska-specific content. So the theme of our planetarium is to tell the story of Alaska. And so we've created several shows over the years, mostly about just what life is like in Alaska and the animals and whatnot. And so we did recently create a planetarium show about climate change in Alaska, and it's called A Place Like No Other. And I'll just share in the chat the full dome database link to it. It's freely available if anyone would like to see it and check it out and use it. But I'll say that when we created the show, we weren't intending to create a show about climate change. what happened is that we received funds to go out to a remote island called Round Island as part of the Walrus Island State Game Sanctuary, where Pacific walrus gather in the summertime on this island. It's an incredibly remote place. Even by Alaska standards, it's very hard to get to. And as such, only about a dozen people visit it every year. So we were incredibly lucky to get to go here. And the highlight of it was to be able to see these walrus. So we got out there and we see these hundreds of walrus on the beach, and it's just amazing to see. And we were talking with one of the employees of the island who keeps track of the walrus, and he said, well, this is impressive. There's hundreds of them, but back in the 70s, there were thousands of them. And then, so the natural question is, well, why is that? And of course, it's because of climate change, because the Arctic is warming, sea ice isn't getting as far south, and so walrus are having a more difficult time getting to this island. And it really was a profound moment for me to realize that here we're on this island. It's one of the most remote places on Earth. It's incredibly pristine. And yet it too was being deeply impacted by climate change. And so I guess what I would say the lesson from that is that climate change is affecting everything in some way. And I really like what Shiloh had to say about talking about local impacts. So in creating this show, we wanted to have a show that talked about the places of Alaska because that's what people are interested in. So I guess my advice would be, don't make a show about climate change. Make a show about things that people care about and talk about how climate change is impacting that. But as creating that show, we also didn't want to create the impression that nothing can be done. As you've probably heard of, there's what's called climate doomism, which is this belief that is hopeless. And this is something we see all the time, and especially my students, young people have a sense that they don't even want to have kids, some of them, because they feel like there's nothing to be done. So we wanted people to leave the show feeling like, hey, this is a problem, but it's a problem we can do something about it. So the show ends with talking about success stories in the state of Alaska, about people who are adopting renewable energies and making their lives actually better. And so that is a key point I'd like everyone to think about. And I really like what Shiloh said about one of the most common question we get is, well, what can we do about climate change? What can I do as an individual? What can we do collectively? And having tactile, concrete things that people can do is really important. We want people to leave with that. So the other thing is, and this is where we as planetarians can really make a big difference, is our audiences are exposed to an incredible amount of misinformation and disinformation about climate change. They're hearing about it in the news, they're hearing about it on social media, and there's a lot of confusion about, one, is it actually happening? And is it, and if so, what can actually be done about it? So a common misconception, a lot of the common misconceptions about climate change are astronomy related. People often think it's just natural climate change. Well, natural climate change is driven by Milankovitch cycles, changes in the Earth's axial tilt and orbit, an astronomy topic. Many people have been misled to believe that it's changes in the sun's brightness, another astronomy topic. And there's many more that I could go on about. And so we are in a wonderful position to help people understand what's actually happening and to address those misconceptions. And so one of the best resources out there is a website called Skeptical Science, which talks about a lot of the common misconceptions that are happening. And they're very good about updating the website to share with people the latest ones. Like for a couple of years ago, there was a common misconception going on about climate change on Mars. And the argument was, well, if Mars is warming up, and there's no humans there, then why should we believe that climate change is happening here? And first off, we don't know that Mars is warming up. That's bogus. But that was the argument that was coming out. So it's a wonderful resource for that. And then finally, I'll just leave with you a resource that is going to come out any day now. And that is a book called Climate Change for Astronomers. And and it's going to be released by IOP Press, but I'm going to share with you in the chat here a link to the Google Docs, which contain all the chapters. Many of the chapters are written by Chun and myself, and over 20 astronomers and people in different fields. And there's several chapters in here talking about how to talk about climate change in informal ed situations, how to counteract disinformation, and how we can connect the astronomy that we talk about in our shows with helping people understand climate change. So I just sent that link in the chat. Even after the book is published, that link will remain active, and you're more than welcome to share it with anyone. So hopefully these are resources that are of use to you. I'll stop there and I'll hand it over to Chun.
All right, thanks a lot, Travis. I'm going to share my screen because I actually have a presentation. And my name is Chun, and I am actually an astronomer at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, for those of you who don't know me. And we've actually done a lot of presentations involving climate and global environmental change over the years. And so I want to talk a little bit about those, but I also want to talk about a framework of how you can talk about climate. And then at the end, I also want to show off some of the visualizations that you can do. I mean, planetariums are great in engaging the public with stunning visuals, and software now are becoming more and more powerful, allowing us to do that. But before we get into that, I want to first ask the following question, which is, how does the public learn about climate change? And for about the quarter of the American public that still uses newspapers, whether they're online or whether they're in physical form, they are getting more and more news about climate change and other environmental topics. But this is just a summary of news articles that have appeared over the last 20 years. And so you can see that there's definitely a gradual trend up coming up to the present. But another question that we might ask is, how effective are these newspaper articles? And some recent research shows that they might not actually be as effective as we would hope. Now, I don't have time to go into all the different topics discussed in this paper, but I just want to focus on one of their plots. And what this paper did was to look at over 50,000 scientific articles, scientific papers on climate change. And one way that they analyzed them was to look at what topics they focused on. And so in these scientific papers, they focused actually mostly on local issues, the local impacts from climate. And as you get to larger and larger scales, there were fewer and fewer papers. But if you looked at the press coverage of climate change, it was the exact opposite. So the press likes to talk about climate as a global issue, and they deal very little about climate as a local problem. And so in summary, what we find in this research paper is that the press likes to focus on climate as a global problem. And that's a problem for educators, because if a problem is global, then there's very little that an individual can do to have anything that they can do to help, or to have any action that they can give that will have any impact. The paper also points out that the press likes to showcase climate as impacts far in the future, as opposed to things that are occurring today or in the near present, and that they also focus mostly on the problem and very little on the solution. And as we've heard from Shiloe and Travis, this is really not the right approach. And instead, what we need to do, and this is something that planetariums and science centers can do as a better approach, is we still need to impart the basic information about climate, but we also need to focus on the here and now, because this is what interests people, the problems that are around them and things that are happening to them right now. And we also need to focus on solutions, how to mitigate the impacts from climate change, how to make our communities more resilient to extreme weather. And when we show that people that solutions are possible, that they can be part of the solution, that empowers our audiences and it allows them to be hopeful. And once they have hope is where we can actually motivate them to take action. And so this type of framework for climate education was something that we took with the Worldviews Network, which was a NOAA-funded project. It was a collaboration of planetariums and science centers across the country that developed a bunch of more than a dozen different public programs involving local issues. And we use the planetarium to set the stage for the problem and give the context. But just as important as the dome presentation was the discussion afterwards, where the audience got together, talked to experts, and they also learned about ways that they can remain engaged. And so this is kind of a summary of what we've done in the past. And I just want to just do a showcase of some of the visualizations that are now possible with modern planetarium visualization platforms. And so these are some examples of stuff that we're doing in Denver, both in the recent past as well as in upcoming presentations. So Mark Subaru is here, and he's partly responsible for this wonderful animation of carbon dioxide sources. And this is an example of how planetariums can showcase global phenomenon. Of course, as we have more CO2 in the atmosphere, that changes the energy balance, and that also changes the surface temperature. But in addition to these global effects, we can also start zooming down into more local phenomena, such as weather. And of course, weather is important for determining how much precipitation we have and how much snowpack we have. And so we've done lots of presentations on water. In the American West, snowpack is ultimately the source for surface water. And in our presentations, we can also fly down to see where the water flows, how it's impounded behind dams, and even fly down to 360 panels to see these locations themselves. We've also started to look at groundwater. And finally, I'll end on this visualization of a heat map showing the heat island effect, showcasing how different neighborhoods in a community can have very different heat stresses depending on how much tree cover they have. So this is an example of how you can use visualizations to get to local issues. And then finally, I'll just end with this word cloud from one of our Worldviews Network evaluations. So this isn't current, but it shows that using this type of framework, focusing on local issues, can result in our visitors giving evaluations where hopeful is the most common word that pops up. And so that at least shows us that there is some effectiveness to this approach.
Wonderful. Thank you to Shiloh and Travis Chun for the intros there. One of the things that, well, I think clear out the, Kachun, if we could have you.
Yeah,
drop
I'm
your
trying
screen
to,
share.
actually, I've lost my, I can find the
There we go.
interface. Sorry
Perfect.
about that.
And so one of the things kind of to initiate sort of the broader conversation is for the three of you, and then we'll open it up to everyone else. What has been the audience reaction, the community reaction to these sorts of projects and initiatives at each of your institutions? What are the sort of the great opportunities and wins, if you will, of putting this together? And has there been any obstacles or pushback to it? And how have you dealt with both of those as the projects have gone on? Kachun, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think our audience response has always been very positive. They appreciate the fact that we are taking them on these journeys where we can start off looking at a global problem, but in the end, we're ultimately zooming down to see how these global issues affect us locally. And I think as far as the challenges go, whenever you're doing presentations like this, I think you're always going against the grain. And so there can be pushback in the sense that other people in your institution might not completely understand how this fits into what a planetarium does. And so, yeah, I've been lucky in being able to create a program that we've been able to sustain an ongoing program that happens several times a year, where we do these sorts of presentations. But I suspect that there are still segments of my museum that don't quite understand, what we're doing, um, and why we should be doing it. And so there can continue to be, ongoing educational challenges within our own institutions.
Shiloh, we'll go to you next.
I guess on the one hand, we're pretty fortunate that because we can tie so much of the research that we talk about with climate change into different aspects of our college of research being done. It allows us for not having a lot of pushback from above. And one of our biggest missions, of course, is outreach. So getting that content out there and getting that information shared, all of that is always like, go for it, let's get it out there. The slight difficulty is in one aspect, we're preaching to a choir. Maybe not per se who already knows about everything, but I'll say it, we live in a red state. I live in a red state, and Tucson is a nice little blue chunk in it, but there are still a lot of people here who don't think that climate change is a thing, and who don't think that what's going on with weather patterns, raising temperatures, the fires we've been having, all that kind of thing is anything related to climate change and whatnot. So there is that difficulty is, how do we reach that area, or do we not? And we look at the younger generations. Pew Research shows that for a lot of millennials and Gen Z, that climate change and environmental concerns are on the top of their list. This is the world that they're going to grow into and maybe have kids or continue to, all that kind of thing. And we don't know how things are going to continue to change. We can model them and it doesn't look great, which is why I was really happy to hear like the happy point that everything lands on. But the concern is, how far can we, where can we go with that kind of limitations? We still see people come in our planetarium who are like, the earth is flat. So, there's just always going to be a little bit of I think a population that's just going to be like, nope, don't believe it. So on the plus side though, everyone who does come and goes through it really enjoys it and gets a lot out of it. I see the little bags, the t-shirt bags that we make. I see them at the grocery store. So I know that something sticks with people, which is always great. And it's something we're going to continue to do. So.
Thanks, Shiloh. And Travis.
So what we do at our planetarium, and I think a lot of people do this as well, is we have an hour-long program where for the first half hour, we show a place like no other. And then I do about a 15-minute presentation called The 5 Things Every Alaskan Should Know About Climate Change. And again, really emphasizing that local aspect. And then the rest of the time is for Q&A. And Alaska is a petrostate. We're also very red, but by and large, people are very interested in learning about the topic. And again, really the biggest question is what can we do? It's really hard to overemphasize how much misinformation is out there and the impact that it is having on people. So people who even are deeply concerned about climate change and want to do something, they're being confused about, is wind and solar, are they actually worse for the environment than the problem itself? EVs, aren't they just catching on fire all the time? So even people who want to do something are really confused about what to do. And so, I think we have a tendency to focus on the deniers, the skeptics and deniers, but they actually make up a very small portion of the population. Statistically, they're only about 10 to 20% of the people out there. The far majority of people are concerned about climate change. They just don't know what to do. And so answering those questions is really one of the most important things that we can do to help them. And I'll just say, and I think this is kind of obvious, but we want people to leave our planetarium feeling like that they were able to ask us questions, that they felt like they were heard, that we responded to them in a way that was kind and respectful, and that they want to come back and learn more. And so especially people who may not have much exposure to science or have access to scientists, this is a very important moment for them to be able to talk with someone who can answer their questions and help guide them through this. And so even things that like, kind of flat earth type stuff that we may roll our eyes at, these are people who are deeply misled, and they do need our respect and consideration, our responses. So that's the thing I want more than anything, that people leave the planetarium feeling like, wow, I learned something today. That was really great. I want to come back and learn more, rather than feeling like, oh, the university, it's just a bunch of ivory tower types. I never want to go back. And so how do people feel when they leave? I think that's the most important thing. And I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you, Travis. Tiffany, floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. I wanted to make a comment about what Shiloh was saying, where you have audiences that maybe don't believe what you're saying, or you're dealing with controversy, and climate change has been politicized around the world, not just here in the US. And there is a lot of misconceptions, and I think a great way to cut through that is to tell those local stories and to connect with people where they are. Because there's been research to show that local impact stories can motivate change even without climate change itself being a motivator. So even if that's the reason for the climate impact, you can get people to engage locally. And so I think we did a survey. It's just here in the US, but we did a preliminary survey with planetarians, and one of the number one thing that we heard was, yes, we want to do more climate science in the dome. We would like more professional development opportunities. And there's a little bit of like reticence as to communicating these controversies and encountering and engaging in the respectful dialogue. So I would like us to see us as a community, as a professional community, have more of those conversations, and also to kind of empower one another and remember that we talk about controversy a lot in the planetarium. The misconceptions are already something that we tackle with astrology and flat earthers, and a lot of those skills we've been developing, and we can apply that to conversations around climate change.
I just
Awesome.
want to
Thank you, Tiffany. Oh,
just want to
Shiloh,
comment.
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to comment that. Yeah, it's 100%. And having the conversations and that's why I love the Science at Sunset program, because we can connect people with those scientists to have those conversations. I mean, I've had people straight up walk out Dynamic Earth, like the last part of it where they talk about how humans are impacting it. Like I have had grown men literally get up and walk out because they are so offended that we even like insinuated that kind of thing. And I think it's just something that's going to happen. Like I said, in our state too, we've got a lot of people who are just, that's what they think. But luckily we have a louder contingency of people who want to learn about it and really do like those local stories and being able to connect with local scientists. And I think, being able to give more of that access to us as planetarians, for us to be able to share that kind of information and their stories, I think also will help empower us to be able to tell more of these stories.
Jeff, go ahead. There we go.
First of all, thanks to everybody, and thanks to Michael and for everybody for tackling this whole topic. Shiloh, I had a question for you based on your last comment. Like, do you feel like it's every show, just anecdotally, even if you haven't kept a tally, is it like every show that somebody's walking out, or is it pretty rare?
Dynamic Earth, when we first launched it, it happened probably like 2 or 3 times a week. And we actually showed it for a big event that the college put on, and they had donors coming, and we had one donor walk out. So take that as you will. But luckily now, I think as we've gone further away from that, it's been a less of a thing. And really it's just a one-off every now and then.
Yeah, for me, NASA deals with that stuff all the time too. And whenever I come across that, my personal strategy is not to focus so much on what our disagreements are, but more focusing on what do you want? Do you want to save money on your energy bill every month? Yes? Great. So do I, right? And stuff like, you want to save food from being wasted? Yeah, great. So do I, right? All like so focusing on the like Travis was saying, the concrete stuff, and I just wanted to share a couple things that happened to me recently, like literally just last week. Someone was coming up to me and she's like, I have so much anxiety around climate. What do I do? Right? Like, and I'm like, first of all, climate anxiety is a thing, right? So good job, all right, for getting stuff. And then I was trying to explain to her all the people who are working, public and private, people who are working on this problem. But then she went too far and she's like, oh, then I don't have to do anything. Right? Then she felt better and she's like, oh, I'm good. We're good. Smart people are figuring this out. I'm like, no, wait, bring it back. Right? Climate change was caused by everybody doing a little bit, right? Everybody doing a little bit contributes to this problem, which means that everybody doing a little bit can contribute to the solution, right? So Travis's mention about leaving people with concrete things that they can do is really spoke to me, and going from doomism to blind optimism of somebody else is going to solve this problem, like those are both pathways that I don't want to leave people on. I want people to leave with down the middle road of, yes, there's some concrete things that I personally can do, choices that I can make that can help and contribute. And if everybody did that, we would be in a much better place. No matter if some genius discovers carbon capture at to scale or whatever, right? The point is that medium and small steps are what I want people to leave with. So thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Travis, and then Ryan.
So I just wanted to reinforce what Jeff said, and that is, and others have said, and that is, agree where you can, find common ground. This is a concept called radical civility, and that is just try to first establish a foundation and a commonality that you have with the person you're talking with, but also respectfully point out where you disagree. So, people often say, oh, well, the climate changes naturally. It's like, well, that's true. It does change naturally, but that's not what we're talking about here. So agreeing with them where you can and then disagreeing with them. And then the second part is really emphasizing local solutions and people in their communities who are doing well. And so we finish our Place Like No Other show by talking about Kodiak Island, which has switched to 100% renewable energy. And as a result, they are now paying less for electricity than we do here in Anchorage. And not only because they have reliably cheap electricity, they've grown the local economy. Kodiak Island is one of the largest fishing communities in the world. And most of the fish that were caught were shipped out of state to be processed elsewhere. But now that they have cheap electricity, a lot of that processing is happening locally. And that's something that really captures people's interest, is that we could actually make our lives better by adopting these solutions. And so by telling a local success story, people, I think, can see how they can get involved. And of course, making it as local as possible. If you can talk about how maybe you've installed solar panels or you've got an EV and how much you love it, then that can inspire people who may be on the edge of wanting to do that, just pushing them that next step forward. And so it makes it something that happens for them. And I'll just finally say, there are very few people that we can take who are deniers and we can convince them in one meeting. But for all those people who are going along the path of awareness, each time they interact with us, it's another step down that path. And for those people who are on the border, are deeply concerned about climate change, but don't yet know what to do, this could be the next step that gets them there.
Ryan, go ahead.
I think kind of building on, in addition to the sort of concrete solutions, and kind of building on what Travis just said, I think the other thing that planetariums can be really great at accomplishing is just getting people to talk. We know that people who come to informal science sort of experiences, whether it's a museum or planetarium, within their group will often have conversations, and that social aspect of sharing that experience is what is meaningful for people in these settings. And I think if we can kind of plus that out a bit and then get people talking within that group and potentially even to their friends and family about these issues, I think it's a much less tangible kind of thing, but it's hugely important. So this is my Catherine Hayhoe fanboy kind of approach. Like it's a really meaningful approach that we can take. And so we're starting to toy around with the idea of like giving people conversation prompts when they leave a program, things like that. So that's kind of like, that's new territory for us, but we're doing these like little interventions now in some of our nightlife programs, which is our like Cocktails and Science 21 and Up program on Thursday nights. And so I can report back, but those are some of the things that we're talking about in terms of encouraging conversation and dialogue amongst people who attend the show, and then how they interact with others beyond that.
Anna, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Hurst. I'm a program director at the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. I am interested in hearing from some of you who maybe are in attendance today because you're interested in doing more around climate and sustainability in your planetariums. What are the challenges or obstacles you're facing, and what kind of support do you need? Because we're really hoping that we can team up with IPS and Cal Academy and Astronomers for Planet Earth to support you all in doing more of this, and would love to know what it is that you need. Is it like connecting with each other, professional development, planetarium assets, community, or let us know what is it that could support you in doing this.
Shiloh, go ahead.
I automatically just raise my hand and then have to go looking for the button. So, as someone who's going to continue doing this kind of thing, I think, assets are always super important, especially when they're, if you can make them where they're like either pre-rendered or renderable, because so many of us have different systems, and that kind of ability to make things super flexible for everyone, I think is always really key. And then maybe somewhere on IPS's site or the Dome Galaxy, we can start maybe like a repository, like when one of us does like a talk or has someone hosting a talk, sharing like PowerPoints that our scientists are using. So that way, like, people can share those and that kind of thing. And I know at some point, I know dome streaming is getting better and better, but being able to share these kinds of talks with scientists with multiple domes at once would always be great too. Pipe dreams, but yeah, let's start with assets.
That was certainly something that came up in the morning meeting or the earlier meeting, to be more specific. That again, it's even the assumption that not everybody has full dome, and what are the kind of stories that we can tell, and what kind of resources that we can use that would work in any dome situation, or any flat screen theater situation, or any sidewalk astronomy event situation, and be far more inclusive of, well, you don't have to be a fixed dome, or you don't have to be a fixed dome with this software, that you're in a mobile dome and you're working with a different subset demographically. How do we have resources that work specifically for those sorts of environments? And so keeping that in mind too, that the broader we can make the use case of the resources, the better it'll be for everybody. Mr. Dantel.
I kind of want to echo and really what Amy just said in the chat too. I think one of the biggest areas too is making sure that planetarians have the professional development to have this information. And I think obviously like not just us who are here in the room, but like every level of planetarium presenter. Because I think to Travis's point, if the key thing is that when the audience is there in the dome and engaging with the presenter, and they're going to be a trusted source, every presenter of every tier at every institution needs to have access to this kind of information and training. And I think again to the point of the biggest target for good data are people who are sympathetic but are misinformed. Is we need to combat our own misinformation. Most of us do not have a climate science background. We're not climatologists. And I think, the way that we gather that information is the same access that the public might have. And so we are just as susceptible to bad information ourselves, even though we are sympathetic parties. And so making sure that, yeah, as a planetarium community, we have really good access to resources, that we are vetting resources, that we have trusted experts within our community who are sharing and helping to direct that information. I think those are going to be some of the key things to really like elevate the quality of information we have, the consistency of information that we can deliver. And yeah, just making sure we're doing the best that we can, and really, yeah, stretching this beyond the experts in our field and bringing that expertise to everybody.
Thanks, Dan. Jeff.
Yeah, on the subject of professional development, when the Museum Alliance did Earth Science professional development, those were actually the lowest attended out of all of ours. It's hard to hear, but so then, you know, and I chalk it up to people just, we're all busy. We're all very busy. So even making time for like to sit down 1 hour, even if you have a NASA climate scientist coming to talk to you about it, people didn't show up is the point. And so if we're talking professional development, what kind of professional development are you saying, yes, I would come to an earth science talk at the Alliance for 1 hour, or do you mean something else? I guess I'm asking Dan, but the whole group too.
I mean, I think it's more about having, because yeah, we're also new people are always going to be coming into and leaving the field. So creating a wealth of like resources, like, you know, a web page, a guidebook, a wiki of vetted resources, rather than having to just attend development workshops, that there is some lasting legacy of resources that people can draw from, that is constantly being updated and vetted and managed to reflect the most recent data and techniques.
Yeah, not to, you know, get too like on the philosophical side of things, but the idea of system agnostic professional development repositories is like the greatest possible future for the planetarium world that there could be. So clearly there's an impetus for us to do things like that more and more. Brian.
Yes, hi everybody. Not to keep, we can start a new direction, but to go with what Amy started and Dan and Jeff continued. For me personally, I think the professional development would help a lot in terms of getting institutional buy-in. You know, I am at a maritime history museum where lately everybody wants to talk about sea level rise. We literally have buildings along the river of our museum that are threatened by rising sea levels. 4 times this winter, we've had half of our museum underwater for a couple of hours. And so our president, who is very much a fan of the planetarium, you know, I approached him and I said, look, I'd like to bring these climate themes into our dome. And he said, well, wait a minute now. We need to make sure that you're trained to do that and you're not an expert. And so he's a fan of it, but he recognizes as much as I do that I don't have that background. So I don't know how many other domes have that upper level of administration you have to break through, but I think that would go, the professional development opportunities would go a long way to getting the green light from up on high to be able to try some of this.
Chun.
Yeah, I think everyone has raised a lot of really good points about professional development, and if we can get a centralized, you know, set of even YouTube videos of workshops that people can go back to, and that you can point newcomers to, that would be really useful. But one other point that I wanted to make, you know, all of us have talked about the importance of having local stories. And, you know, sometimes we know what the local stories are, but I would also encourage everyone here, you know, if you are not sure about the local issues, or if you don't feel like you're an expert on some sort of local aspect of climate change or other environmental story, you should go out and seek people who are experts. I mean, there are nonprofits, there are government agencies, there are organizations out there that's probably doing a lot of work involving, you know, sea level rise, or involving wildfires, or involving heat stress, or drought, or flooding. And you know, engage with those folks and learn about how you can get their message of what they are doing to help make your community more resilient, and how to get their message to your audiences. Because, you know, again, these professional development actions that we're talking about can talk about climate as a global problem. You can talk about the basic science, but only you can go out and learn about what the local problems are that are affecting your community. And so this perhaps adds, an additional task that you may not want to be part of your job, but whenever I've done it, I find it to be super rewarding, to go out and talk to people, and and perhaps you might be able to find someone who's a really good speaker. You can actually ask them to be a guest speaker in your programs.
Travis, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so for many years, we've been running workshops for the American Astronomical Society on how to train astronomers to be better educators and communicators about climate change. And the primary concern that astronomers have is actually the one that I think many planetarians have, and that is they feel like they don't know the science well enough. And that was actually the inspiration for writing the book, Climate Change for Astronomers, was to create a volume for astronomers to have access to that knowledge. But in the process of writing it, we realized that actually wasn't the real issue. Knowing the science well enough was not the barrier. It really was the communication aspect. And I want to emphasize that as planetarians, as people who are used to being in a dome and talking with audiences, you're actually in a better position than most scientists to effectively communicate it. And I'll share with you a story about a talk we did once where we had a climate scientist come and present, and it was a disaster. He was very defensive and very aggressive, and I don't fault him at all, because climate scientists, as I'm sure you're aware, are under a tremendous amount of pressure. They're getting death threats. They're getting, all sorts of pressure from on high to censor their science, and so they're often really, really emotionally charged, and they're not necessarily in a good position to have that productive conversation to address those common concerns that people have and do it in a way that, again, is respectful and inviting for further dialogue. And so I'll just say that as planetarians, we are already in a very good position to talk with people. Yes, there's lots of science to know. There's lots of information to know about the solutions, and that is really, again, what our book is trying to help people with. But as long as you know the fundamentals of climate change, and that is by burning fossil fuels, we're adding these gases to the atmosphere, and that's what's warming the Earth, you're done. That's the science. Really, the emphasis now needs to be on helping people understand what the next steps are to address that. And I think everyone here is already in a good position. So these sorts of workshops, I think, and things are very good to help people be better presenters. But I think it's also very important for people to understand they're already in a good position and they shouldn't shy away from addressing it.
Thanks, Travis. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to double back a little bit on the sort of asset side. So I just, well, my group now, we've at NASA, anyway, Mark Subaru with the NASA Scientific Visualization Studio, but we've been putting a lot of effort the last year, this major project called the Earth Information Center. So it's this big physical display. We have 100+ data visualizations. We've got a team of a dozen people who are cranking things out every single day. We have new assets. So anyway, these assets are out there, and people like Chun can find them and use them in the programs, which is great. But I don't know that everyone can. So I'd love to talk about ways that maybe through IPS, Mike, or some way that we can package all of this material and make it more findable for the community. And then a second point I wanted to make is that there are events, there are things that happen at certain times of the year that it would be great to see if we could get the planetarium community together around promoting. So for example, at the end of every year, NASA and NOAA get together and they announce the average temperature for the year, and that's an event. It's like it's a terrible time because it was the middle of the coldest day of the year, but it is like an event. In March, we're going to announce what was the global sea level rise for the year, and there's wildfire season. There are a number of these things, but having sort of a calendar where people get together in a coordinated programming, I think could magnify the effectiveness of it.
Mark, totally agree with you on both of those points. Jeff, go ahead.
Thanks. Just going to off of what Travis said and Brian said earlier is that, you know, imposter syndrome is big here at NASA. I don't know if you've been following the news at JPL recently. There's a lot of imposter syndrome going on at NASA, and why am I qualified to talk about this? Even PhDs tell me that all the time, right? So my specific question to Brian would be, like, what does your administrator want you? Does he want you to get a PhD in sea level rise? Is that what he's asking for, right? And same thing with Travis. If the biggest issue is the communication part, it's the science is well understood. It's not too difficult, and you know, this even ties back to professional development. Like, what level of professional development are you looking for? Like, do you want to know how to analyze the data like a scientist? Like, what science skills can NASA provide to you that would make you feel comfortable tackling the issue, that would make your administrators comfortable with you tackling these issues? So that would be my specific question to Brian and the whole group.
Put me on the spot, Jeff? No, it's a great question, and I was a little bit like taken aback by the, like, you know, the dealing with the museum president. But yeah, it's a good to go back and say, you know, would you want me to complete a certificate course? Do you want me to attend a 2-hour webinar? You know, at what point would I be deemed as having the knowledge necessary to speak competently on the subject? That's a good point. And if anyone else has any, you know, similar experience or has taken it that next step, I'd be curious to hear how it went.
Rick, you've got the floor.
Well, let me take this in just a little bit different direction. First of all, Rick Greenwald, manager of the Faulkner Planetarium at the College of Southern Idaho. Kind of want to go back to something earlier that Shiloe mentioned, living in a red state. So Idaho is an extremely red state. And even shows that we bring in that touch a little bit on environmental changes, climate change and such, we're starting to get some blowback. People here, the vast majority, greatly deny this. You know, so the programs that we brought in, just mentioned, I bring in large giant screen format films because we don't have any large, you know, IMAX film theaters in the state. They have to travel, and they've done very well for us. You know, we have gone with extreme weather, which you know, is all right earlier on, but we've done shows like Sea Lion's Life by a Whisker. It touches on climate change in Australia. Ningaloo, Australia's other great reef. Long Ago Flight of the Butterflies. All these touch on climate change. And yeah, generally these movies do fairly well for us, especially nature ones. But we just, right after Christmas, I opened up the Arctic, Our Last Great Wilderness. And even before it hit, we got blowback on social media, people asking if this was another propaganda show. And, you know, it's so, I'm almost to the point of having to dial back because this area, you know, they will deny it in question and answer sessions with school groups and things. And, you know, so it's a little hard to approach it. I'm wondering if other people have that problem as well in their areas. And then I'll just mention too that I'm in the point now where I'm evaluating the next shows that I will bring in here. I do this once a year because I have an endowment. And I'm looking at you know, some of the latest programs that are coming out. There's a lot of them that are starting to have an environmental lean to them. You know, I'll just mention like a couple, and it's not saying anything, not critiquing these shows in any way, but NSC Creative, We Are Guardians was, you know, a topic on that. Reef, the new show Little Major Tom is like that. I look at those and I worry a little bit about bringing in because my audience is kind of teetering, you know, kind of walking that line. So, you know, I'm kind of curious, anybody else experiencing that, and how are you tackling it?
Yeah, Rick, I knew we would get to that level of this discussion soon enough. So yeah, if there's anyone who wants to speak to that more directly, please feel free.
I'll just say again, local stories, as Joe mentions in the comments here. If you can talk about local farmers or ranchers who are able to put in wind and raise, raise money. I mean, as people have said, wind and solar are dollar bills floating over our heads. We just need to be smart enough to reach up and grab them. If you can share examples of that. Now, I know there's a lot of disinformation campaigns going on right now to try to keep people from installing wind and solar, and unfortunately, they are having an impact. But if you can,
we hear, if I can just interject, there are wind farms here, but right here in the area that they're trying to put in one of the largest wind farms in the United States called the Lava Ridge Project. And you would not believe the blowback. I mean, this project most likely is going to die, like about 8 years ago, trying to put in again, one of the world's largest wind projects in the southern part of our county. It got knocked down. They're very well organized, and even trying to tie it into local stories or even regional for the state. A few things that have happened in the past year. So we talk about fire season. A few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, they're predicting an extreme fire season for the West, Idaho and such. Other parts of the West were impacted, but here in Idaho, we weren't that year. And they grab hold of that. It didn't happen here locally, so it's not an issue. So trying to tell a local story here is, I hate to say it, but extremely difficult. Almost drives the audience away.
Rick, that's some really good insight, and two, to like one of, you've probably noticed that with like even just the title of the town hall, that it's not just climate, it's climate environmental, and hopefully for all of us, like collectively, we can come up with this sort of the spectrum of topics at which point we can help. Rick, in your case would be a good example. Where along this continuum does your local audience become invested in the story rather than against it? Like, oh, climate, absolutely not. But maybe this environmental, or as was brought up, Susan Button brought this up in our early meeting, something like light pollution, which seemingly is innocuous enough to be able to talk to anyone about, but does have real personal health concerns and wildlife, and sort of like, where are all of the on-ramps in these discussions? I think trying to identify more of those on-ramps so that collectively, as a community, we can say, okay, if I start here, what could be the next step forward? Or do I have to start all the way back at the lights are too bright and you can't see the stars? There's nothing political about that. And I guarantee someone would find a way to make it political. But at the very least, hey, as a community, can we do a better job of identifying those situations where then we can input the resources and then hopefully get people on a journey to more scientific literacy and all that. Steve, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah, this is Steve Kosis with the Marie Drake Planetarium in Juneau, Alaska. And we have an interesting local story here in Juneau. August 8th, we had a glacier release flood from the Mendenhall Glacier. And this has been ongoing for about 5 years in the summer. But this was the largest outflow, and it destroyed up to 8 houses and caused other houses to be condemned. So this is concern from global climate change. Our tidal glaciers and our valley glaciers have all been receding. There's actually only one static glacier in the area in Juneau, is the Taku Glacier. The other ones are all receding. And the experts are saying that this glacial flood from the Mendenhall Glacier is going to be increasing for the next 3 or 4 years before it goes away. But this is a new local issue for Juneau, Alaska.
Thanks, Steve. Any other persons? Travis, I see you're off mute. Go ahead.
I'll just comment. The flooding that happened in Juneau was horrific, and then the next day, the fires in Maui broke out. And we're now at a point where these events are occurring so frequently. It's hard often to keep focus on what caused something and you know what can be done. And also there's, I think, a fair bit of burnout, because every day in the news there is a climate related event, which is the sad reality. And again, this drives the climate doomism, which is why it's so important to give people stories to feel good about.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
About the fires of Maui, there's a lot of disinformation as well. And how do you find out how to sift through that? I mean, there was conspiracy theories that rich people were trying to get rid of all the locals so they could have waterfront property for tourist development and big condominiums and what like that. And the fires were so intense, it couldn't have possibly been nature. It was definitely set by people on purpose. And the next day, Oprah Winfrey showed up because she wanted to check on her property to make sure that it got properly cleared and everything got burned off as so she could build her condominium complex and whatnot. And how do you address subjects like that in with the public without taking sides, without ridiculing, but really trying to get people to find the truth?
Hey, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, Tony Smith with ASP now, formerly of Bishop Museum Planetarium, also now with Washington State University Planetarium a little bit. I'm really interested in how, if there's any data out there that people are aware of, and like how you're framing or even titling different programs, right? Like Shiloh mentioned doing a program called Mighty Monsoons and not calling it anything about climate change. Like, do we know if that's a potential strategy that we can look at, of like, don't say the word climate change if you're in an area that you're going to have a bunch of blowback and stuff about that, but still you're talking about the same stuff, and like people are going to figure it out, right? If they're the ones that are looking for it, and they're the ones who want to get agitated and make a big scene when they storm out of your theater because they figure it out, right? But I'm interested if that's an approach that anyone knows anything about.
Chun, go ahead.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head, Tony. I mean, this is the exact approach. You really have to know your audience. And, you know, we've gone out and talked with farmers who tend to be extremely conservative. And so you really don't want to mention the words climate change to them. But if you talk about drought, if you talk about water availability, if you talk about having drought, you know, 1 month, and then the next month you have these epic biblical rain events, those are things that they can latch on to. So framing is, I think, really, really important. You know, yeah, I was thinking about, you know, Rick's problem in Idaho, and I'm not sure, you know, I have any more of an answer than you have, since you've been dealing with this problem. But it looks like Idaho did undergo a 2-year period recently where you were deeply in drought, and a lot of that has gone away. But you know, perhaps that is an entry point to talking about how you may not want to use the words climate, but you know, the environment has changed, and you know, and how do communities, how do farmers, how do ranchers prepare for the next time that you go through an extended period where the rains don't come when you expect it. And then finally, I guess I have one last comment from just listening to what Brian said earlier about, you know, his CEO or his president wanting to know what sort of experience he has to talk about climate. And I think, you know, I completely agree with Travis. There's a certain minimum amount of science that you would want to know, but you know, a lot of it is very basic, that greenhouse gases change the energy balance, and it causes temperatures to go up. I mean, that's not, you can't get any more basic than that. But I also want to point out that, you know, as planetarians, you often talk about scientific topics that you are not experts about. I mean, you know, how many times have you gotten a question about black holes from the audience? And oftentimes, the person asking the question will be asking about some very, out there question about black holes that you don't really, you might have heard about, but you're not really qualified to answer. And, as planetarians, we have ways of answering the question without really answering the question. We don't want to give them the wrong answer or you give them misinformation. But oftentimes, we can say we don't know, or, I can tell you what I think, what scientists know about this, but I don't necessarily can't answer your question directly. So there are ways to get around that. So I think, trying to say that you need a certain level of expertise to be able to talk about the subject is in some ways a cop-out.
I guess one issue is, climate change is hard to deny. The problem is it because of mankind or is it a natural phenomena? Especially when you see reports where a big swamp somewhere puts out more methane gas in a week than all the cows on Earth, or something like that. And it just, how do you separate the facts in order to say that mankind has actually had the big impact and it's not all just a natural phenomena that we can't do anything about?
Glenn, I think that's a good point because we run into that all the time with, well, Mars was warmer and had water, and now it's not as warm and doesn't have surface water, and that's a climatic change. And then we talk about Venus, and maybe Venus was a bit more habitable location for us, sort of thing. And then because of carbon dioxide buildup and the greenhouse effect, that those are more easily accepted by audiences because they're super long-term and distant. And then the moment that humans get involved, there's that sense of like an attack on identity. Like, there's no way humans could be causing something like this when it's happening naturally elsewhere or has happened.
It's even happened on Earth. The Earth has been in worse shape previously than it is now, and it's been covered with ice, down to the Tropic of whatever at times as well. So
precisely,
the fact that it's just happening faster now, faster than we're able to react to, or some people you can't just pick up and move away from the coast if that's where you've been your whole life. So,
Travis. You are on mute, sir.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So one of the things you can do is you can give people information that helps them understand the issue of climate change without actually talking about climate change. And Venus and Mars are both perfect examples of what can go wrong with the planet. And even just having people understand that there's no guarantee that a planet is going to stay habitable can open their mind to the understanding that that's also true for the Earth. And you bring up a very good point, Glenn, and that is that there's been times when the Earth has been a lot hotter than it is now, and also a lot colder. But the key thing is we weren't here, and neither were the plants and animals that we rely upon. And we can also look at the geologic history of the Earth and see that there have been major catastrophic events that have caused mass extinction. And, whether these are asteroids hitting the Earth or volcanic, super eruptions or whatever. And so these are ways to share with people the idea that the Earth, there's no guarantee the Earth remains habitable. And that's a way I think you can address the topic indirectly. And so using these novel directions allows you to bypass the established battlegrounds that people already have. And there's a lot of research on what sorts of visuals work, what sort of framing works that help people. Don't show pictures of polar bears, because as soon as you do that, that just triggers people they know what you're going to say next, and they get their defenses up and they don't want to go there. And so I'll just say, one of the things I've had success with is by saying, I'm an astronomer who works on climate change. People kind of look at you like, really? Well, what does astronomy have to do with it? Tell me more. And then that's created an opportunity to have a novel conversation about the topic in a way that they haven't heard before. And those are things that I think we can do as well, is bring up the topic in ways that people aren't familiar and overcome those hurdles.
Julieta, over to you.
Yes, so I'm Julieta, and I work at the Adler Planetarium for a few years with Mark, and I know many people here. And I wanted to say, the reason I took that job, because I'm an artist, I'm a designer. So my job is to guide attention, right? I make people move their attention to topics. And the reason I wanted to take that job at the Adler was because I was intrigued by how scale changes attention, our perception, and molds our thinking. And I think there are lots of fallacies, as Travis was saying, that are kind of attentional fallacies, right? That put things at the wrong scale. Like I assume that because I'm in a certain condition, everybody else and at different scales is the same. And what happened with the change of scales is context changes. So we don't see what's happening because it's so insignificant at the personal scale, but it is massive because of all our little inputs on it. So I wanted to say maybe this is something to discuss, to say, it's not just the data, but the data at which scale and how it's affecting and how we're building on it. So things are not insignificant. There's nothing that doesn't matter. Everything matters. And it matters if many people are acting the same way. So for good and bad. So I think there's some entry points there that maybe I want to encourage you to pay attention to your artists and people working on perception and see how to kind of detangle these misleading assumptions. That's it.
Thank you, Julieta. Anyone else? We are coming up on half past the hour here, and we don't want to stretch this much past those 90 minutes. But if there's anyone else who wants to share their insider perspective or ideas for that matter, please feel free. All right. Well, in that case, we will take that as a good time to wrap up today's discussion, but also a reminder that as we go through the rest of 2024, and of course the years and years to follow, we intend to have this project and these collaborations with IPS and Astronomical Society, Pacific Astronomers for Planet Earth, Cal Academy, and others. There's still much more that we can do here, I think, getting the awareness of the needs for professional development and system agnostic content ingestion and all of those sorts of things that are going to help to remove some of the barriers and the obstacles that planetariums feel in approaching climate and environmental topics. There's still a lot of work to be done, and whether it's at IPS this summer or at any of the planetarium conferences throughout the year, or for those of you who might end up in Cape Town for IAU in August. These are really good opportunities for us to continue the networking and continue those connections. And it's wonderful when we have people like Chun and Travis and Shiloe and Anna with ASP and Tony. Like, you can look around the room and you can see that we have this very, very strong network. And then with people like Mark, not to put you on the spot, Mark Subarow, but we have people making amazing visualizations who have that planetarium background in mind. Hey, if there's anything that we can do collectively as a community to help sort of influence and shape how the future of visualizations and data ingestion and things like that happen, do feel free to reach out to us and let us know if you're interested in participating. We'll have this up on the Dome Dialogues YouTube page within the day. There's a lot that was going on in the chat, so if you haven't been able to go through that, we will make sure to post that so that everyone can go through and see all the resources there. But again, like, we can't change the world if we don't figure out what we want to do with it, and the best step is the next step. So thank you all for being here, and being part of the conversation and the dialogue. And hopefully, as we go through the rest of the year, Brian, it would be awesome when we go to MAPS in a few months. Hey, let's continue these discussions and show off ideas and bring that through conference after conference, meeting after meeting, networking opportunity after opportunity. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk again real soon. Take care.
Take care.